Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni. Tonight's topic is a continuation from last week's topic. Tonight's theme is why early childhood education is more important than varsity. Prof Mandi Rukuni will present to us. After his presentation, we'll open up the floor for questions and contributions. And we'll close off the session after at 7:30. Session rules: please use the hand reaction button if you wish to make a question. If you wish to ask a question or make a contribution, please inbox the moderator or the host for any questions you'd like to be asked, which will be included in the media pack later on. This conversation will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni. Please do subscribe and like in order to get future content from this session. Thank you and welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Kevin. So welcome to this talk, which is probably the most important of all the talks around education we're going to have. Next slide. I say this is the most important because it's not based on too many educational theories. The educationalists have missed this point. It is the neuroscientists who understand the importance of early childhood development. And what I'm going to talk to you about over the first 10 minutes is all entirely from what I've learned over the years from the leading neuroscientists in the world, such as Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza. These are people you should follow and read their material, and you'll be amazed at how behind we are in education. So the thing is, before you can become conscious after you're born, you need some software, because consciousness means you are now able to analyze things. Now, the unfortunate fact that we are not aware of as people in education is that 95%, so 90 to 95% of our lives is actually driven by the programs of how we live life that we actually got in the first 7 years of our lives. And that is the single most important reason why it is so difficult to change habits. It's so difficult to change some hardwired beliefs. It's because they are actually wired in the first 7 years. That also explains why people from poor families are more likely to stay poor, even if they have an education. And that explains why people from wealthy families are likely to actually create wealth, even though they may be even dumb or less intelligent than those from poor families. So that is why the neuroscientists say, if you have watched the movie Matrix, it is science fiction, but it is actually closer to reality than science fiction, because for every human being, the first 7 years, the brain is in hypnotic state, and the brain is operating at very low brain vibration frequencies. This is important, and I'm going to summarize it as follows. There are 4 states of consciousness, depending on the brain frequency. You got the beta state, which is when you are fully awake, like we are all now. Then you've got alpha, where you are very relaxed state and the brain activity has subsided. Then your theta. Theta actually is when you are in between consciousness and semi-consciousness. You're sleepy. So the conscious state weaves in with what we call the hypnotic state. So that's what we mean by hypnotic state. It doesn't mean hypnosis in the regular use of the term. And then delta is when you are asleep. So the child of the brain, most of the time, is actually in theta. They are in a state where reality and imagination is one and the same thing. So that theta state is what we are talking about. So before one can become conscious as after you're born, you now therefore need to start recording what life is all about. And before you have those programs, you don't know how to react to life. So that's what's meant by consciousness. Because if you don't have that software, there's nothing to be conscious of. So how does it happen in the first 7 years? Nature, the environment, is what provides the programs. And how does the child get that? Well, because they are in hypnotic state, they don't need to do anything. They're just like a video recorder. The child will watch, and the important teachers in life at that stage are the parents. They watch the parents. They listen to everything. They feel everything. The siblings and the community. These are their professors and associate professors. You see, just think about it. When you're a child, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, you have to learn thousands of little rules and big ones about life. Eh? You don't sit them down in a classroom, do you? You don't. They just observe, record at terrific speeds, which we're going to talk about a bit later. And consciousness means they are able to download those lessons and be able to apply them to life. This is how a child learns about life. Why is this important for early childhood development and what we call early child care education? So I'm using these terms a bit interchangeably because that is what we want to focus on. Like I said, the most unfortunate fact of our lives is that 90 to 95% of our lives come from these programs that we uploaded in the first 7 years. And they are then permanently lodged in our subconscious mind. So on a daily basis as adults, only about 5% of our life and decisions is controlled by the conscious mind. What's the difference between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind? Well, the conscious mind is creative. That's the creative part of the brain. Meanwhile, the subconscious mind is totally reactive. And you don't see it, you're not even aware of it. But those of you who were unfortunate enough to be trained by the Jesuits, actually the Jesuits were the first of the colonial lot of religious outfits who understood this. And their motto for almost 400 years was, give me a child until it's about 7 years and I will show you the man. Okay, but we did not understand what they meant. And the educational institution still does not fully understand what they meant. We still don't understand it today. That's why I say this is the most important 5-10 minutes of our discussion in the whole subject of education. So that first, 7 years or so of one's life is the programming period. Okay, so as we said, a lot of what is recorded during that period is then played back as a reaction to life. Okay, so just imagine the impact that has on one's life after they become adults. If a child of 3 years old is told, no, don't do that, you are stupid, you are dumb, or you're very clever, or yes, that's the way to do it, those messages are recorded at super speed in the child's memory. And the more emotional content behind the messages, like somebody's going to be hit or they're going to be treated harshly, they record that even faster and it's played back even faster. Okay, so we are not aware of this generally, that we 95% of our lives run by programs. We're an app. We're not different to a computer or a tablet or a phone. We are only 5% different from these items because they will play back the programs that have been loaded. They don't have that extra 5% intelligence, although we are now talking about artificial intelligence. But even if you gave a computer artificial intelligence, it still won't go beyond 5% of its daily use. And this is where we are. We're just a set of programs. We're an app. And the way this app applies to us, like I said, is we play back unconsciously what we especially repeatedly heard, saw, felt over those first 5 to 7 years. So if as an African, you grew up with you are inferior, you're not as good as the other ones, or we are backward because of who you are and where you come from. All those things you record. So the famous book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is partly back on this fact of life, that if you come from a poor family, you can have the highest education, you can work harder than somebody who comes from a wealthy family, and the chances are that you still remain poor. Only a few will break through. And vice versa. We're going to have people who are pretty much dumb, pretty much not as intelligent, but they come from a situation where the messages were more positive and were more aligned with a specific value, whether it's creation of wealth or whatever it is. So it's this unconscious behavior that we have to be careful of. And we're going to talk in a few minutes how to deal with this issue. So the conscious mind and the subconscious mind are developed differently and they learn differently. And this is the key thing. The conscious mind learns in a number of different ways. It's mostly you read something, or you attend a lecture, you go into a class, you actually sit down and you're mentored by somebody on an issue. This is how the conscious mind actually learns. The subconscious mind only learns in two ways. As I've said, in the first 7 years, it's through a hypnotic process. They capture everything hypnotically. And also it's played back hypnotically. So the subconscious mind, after the first 7 years or so, ceases to learn many new things. It continues to learn other things hypnotically, but you are less and less in hypnotic state for learning. So the only way to learn as a young adult in your subconscious mind is through repetition. Something that you repeat over and over again can eventually also become part of your subconscious mind as an adult. Or a lot of practice eventually becomes a habit. That's why some coaches say, when you're an adult and you want to change your habits, you cannot change easily. You start by faking it until you make it. If you feel you're not attractive, if you feel you're not intelligent enough, if you feel you're not confident enough, start by actually acting it and faking it. And through repetition and repetition, you are going to actually probably unlearn or learn something new. So your life is practically a printout of your subconscious mind. And as I've said earlier, it's understanding those operational frequencies of our lives, those 4 states: the beta state when you're fully awake or conscious, that's what we call conscious then. The alpha when you're relaxed, less conscious. But the theta is where you are in between conscious and hypnotic state. And that's even as an adult, where you still have opportunity to change habits or learn new habits. We don't have chance to talk about it in this session, but important thing is to say for the child, that's practically 95% of a child's life is theta. They even when they are quote unquote fully conscious, youngsters are in theta most of the time. If they are playing house with plastic or they are driving a toy as a car, there is no distinction between what you and I call reality and imagination. When a child could be alone and still have 2-3 different friends, and for hours the child can play with those friends because there's no distinction for them between reality and imagination. So let's go into the second most important aspect of this initial talk, because the subconscious mind is extremely fast, much faster than the conscious mind. It is 1,000,000 times faster. Here's what scientists tell us. Here's what the neuroscientists have come up with. I mean, if you read the literature, there are obviously differences, but the conclusion is always the same. The subconscious mind, on average, processes information at the speed of 40 million bits per second. Okay. Meanwhile, the conscious mind is a speed of 40 bits per second. So literally, the subconscious mind is 1,000,000 times faster than the conscious mind. Okay. Then again, the subconscious mind, the impulses travel at a speed of, on average, 160 kilometers per hour. That is half this, just a little over half the speed of what am I saying here? Anyway, it's pretty fast, 160,000 kilometers per hour. The conscious mind, the impulses are traveling at 160 to 200 kilometers an hour. So the important point here is difficult to fight against the subconscious mind. You may feel this way. I want to stop drinking. I want to do more exercise and eat less starch. I want to be less angry. You can think, that is your conscious mind, your creative mind thinking at 40 bits per second. Your subconscious mind will, at 1,000,000 times more speed, take you back to where you don't want to go. And tomorrow you feel, what, I just decided I'm not, I'll stop overeating. I'm still overeating. So this is extremely important to know, that what our children record in their subconscious mind in the first 7 years will literally have a 90% contribution to their personality in the end. Okay, this is why I'm taking so much time on this particular aspect of the talk, because it is what should tell us how to deal with early childhood education or early child care and education. Because overall, the personality is shaped during that period. And what is, it's a personality for me is one's own personal reality. Okay, so how you think, how you feel, how you act determines your personality. That's your personal reality. So of the 8 billion people in the world, each one has their own personal reality. We all think slightly differently, we will act slightly differently, and we will feel differently. So if we are going to change reality, it is not reality that's changing, it is our personality that's changing. We have to change ourselves before you can change reality, because reality is what you perceive. So this is why it's so important to focus on those first formative years of our young children. And I would say Africa is at a crossroads. I am schizophrenic about it, although I have no difficulty in that ambiguity, because I'm quite comfortable with ambiguous situations. So the literature tells us that only about 1% of African children are receiving formalized early childhood education. And to me, there's a big advantage to it and a small disadvantage. The big advantage to the fact that most of African children still don't go to formal school until maybe 5. The big advantage is that it delays this cross-cultural confusion that continues to manufacture this identity crisis in Africans. You see, because most of their ECD and ECCE education is currently based almost totally on Eurocentric curriculum. And that, just imagine our children from the age of 1 to 5, 6, they are already pumped entirely with a Eurocentric curriculum. That's cultural suicide, okay, which will prolong all sorts of dependencies that we are currently experiencing. There's therefore urgent need. The disadvantages, of course, then we don't have what you might call advanced ways of accelerating African-based ways of enhancing learning for our preschool kids. So the urgent need is to recraft early childhood education so that it is based on African educational foundations, so that we can really awaken the African giant as a major global player by producing youngsters in the first 7 years who have no identity crisis, who are totally comfortable with who they are, and their creative mind is ready for action. So I would say today, although it sounds radical, I've got my argument for suggesting that African children should not be confined in any kind of classroom situation or environment until they are more than 7 years old. They should not be in a classroom at all. And this, it should not just be African children. No children anywhere in the world should be confined to a classroom situation because of what we know now about how they learn. Because what we know about the semi-hypnotic state, which determines 95% of their learning, it doesn't make sense to confine them in a classroom, except that for an industrialized manufacturing society, just parents are not available at home, the community is not available at home to look after them, but we need to find a way of fighting this industrial anomaly that forces us to literally manufacture young children as if they are in a factory. So I've brought to you the scientific evidence. If you just go back, I've tried to bring to you the scientific evidence why Africans should rethink this. The curriculum and pedagogy of early childhood education in Africa should be much more linked to the indigenous education philosophies. And that is what builds identity and confidence in the future of the child. Next slide, please. So how should we approach the formalization of ECD and ECCE? If we go beyond early childhood education and look at primary school education, secondary school education, university education, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that education in Africa is a poverty-creating industry. It does nothing but to create poverty. It prepares young people for a world that does not exist. It prepares them for jobs that don't exist. And moreover, even more important, there's no civilization anywhere. There are no people anywhere in the world who were entirely dislodged from their ancestral roots and then somehow make some collective progress with civilization or development. It has not happened anywhere in the world, and we are not going to be the first ones. So the problem is education, as we are practicing it in Africa, enlightens people by distancing the people and estranging Africans from their life circumstances. So the overarching challenge in Africa for the educational system is therefore how to mold its children, especially young children, in the image of an African identity. And the educational system has to develop productive citizens who are adept and adaptable to the requirements of this global era. Okay, so I would say that the world is being deprived of the best from Africa simply by the way we have failed to recraft our educational system so that it is a real knowledge creating system and able to generate creativity in all spheres of life. So we need a radical reform to the educational system based on African knowledge and wisdom and its heritage. Next slide, please. So we need teacher training colleges, we need universities, we need all manner of African institutions to really focus on what it is that we have to research into and analyze so that we can improve early childhood education. We have to come up with improved frameworks of learning and intelligent behavior of our children, and not this kind of a cookie cutter approach that we have adopted from Eurocentric paradigms. We need more didactic and participative pedagogies, didactic meaning more character forming pedagogies, more Africa-centric approaches to research into education and innovation. We need to progress from a kind of product-oriented teachers to process-focused facilitators rather than the traditional teacher. Teachers or facilitators who are able to incite young children as curiosity and zeal to discover things for themselves. So learning is more important than teaching, and an educational system which is more learner focused is more important than one that is teacher centered. Okay, so this is why I'm pushing for this kind of generative, innovative approach to education. Next slide, please. So a holistic generative education basically still links learning to family and community. And I've said producing a total human being. So here are some of the things that I think early childhood education should aim as outcomes, or learning to be human, which is the most African thing, learning to belong, identity, learning to become, because you were never fully done, you're always coming and becoming. Individually, you're always becoming, and collectively. Learning to learn, learning how to learn, learning how to know, learning how to think, but also learning how to think individually, but also learning how to think collectively, learning to do and act, also individually and collectively, learning how to live with others, learning how to work with others, to play with others, to think with others, to feel with others, learning to connect and interconnect not only with others, but the environment. And probably finally, importantly, learning how to transform, because you are transforming every single second of your life. It's transformation all the way through, and learning how to transform individually and collectively. And children below the ages of 7 or so need to acquire what I still call holistic knowledge that cannot just be achieved through what you must call conscious learning. It has to be through both subconscious, mostly subconscious learning, unconditional love. They have to learn trust, discipline, learning how to aspire, how to be curious, how to handle success, failure, learning to be confident. So the future of African civilization is dependent on how we formalize this kind of early child care education. Like I said earlier, or implied, the cultural identity of African children is a right which cannot be alienated. It's a right enshrined in the UN Convention. So I've already explained, therefore, why we should not be too excited about expanding early childhood education until we've sorted out this quagmire. Well, education is the DNA of society. I hope I have convinced you. I say the whole of my talk today is entirely based on this point that education is the DNA of our society, and that 95% of that DNA is replicated in the first 7 years. If we mess it up at that point, it means that we are just continuing to replicate the damaged DNA, which is what we've been doing post-colonial. The educational system over the last 60 years is replicating a damaged DNA, because in the first 7 years, we are messing it up and then hope that by spending most of our resources in university education, we're going to change our society, and it's not happening. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the ability to interpret knowledge within an African historical or philosophical, cultural, and social context is key to legitimate education in Africa. And before we confine our children in schools, in walls, we need our teachers, parents, community leaders to understand how to interpret and get a clear understanding in the context of education, so that it's not just a classroom thing. It has to be a community or society thing. We have to change how we bring up and educate our children, especially in those early years. And we have to go back and really renew the educational system as the DNA of society, renewing it and refreshing it. We have to link education within and outside the school system. We have already said, emphasize less on teaching, greater emphasis on children learning from themselves, less emphasis on mimicry and more emphasis on creativity, and using our mother tongues as formal part of education, and still teach children foreign languages as foreign languages, because children can learn 2, 3, 4 languages at a time, but the primary one should be the mother tongue, and then they can use the rest as foreign languages. And as I said before, we should encourage code switching as long as the learning environment can cope with it. Children should be allowed to switch between 1, 2, 3 languages and be able to communicate, especially African languages, so that we don't continue to give excuses that Africa has got a problem of too many languages. In most circumstances, you would have many similar languages posing as different languages. And I've explained this before. In Shona, we have so many dialects, and beyond the dialects, we have others with, for the Zimbabweans, that is, that no longer appear to be Shona, but they were part of the same group, like Venda, Kalanga, and so on and so forth. Same thing with the Nguni languages. They're all the same, really, whether it's Zulu, Swati, Xhosa, Ndebele. Today they are taught as separate languages, but they're pretty much the same. Same with the Sotho languages. It could be Pedi, it could be Tswana. It's all the same stuff. They should all be taught and used interchangeably. That's what I'm pushing for, so that we're able to tell more stories. We need to tell our own stories. I need that last time. We need to tell our own stories, because we have to create a new history for ourselves out of the past and be able to move forward as thinker-doers. And I've already said it before, I'll say it again, because knowledge only exists at the point of action. But on early childhood education, once again, I think we don't have to wait. We cannot wait until we have a certain kind of perfection, or we need to start really changing this educational system in the first 7, 8 years. And I think that is the easiest part for Africa. That may sound the most difficult, But I think we should start by a radical approach which says children below the age of 8 should not spend much time in a classroom. It's the most useless place for them. It's the one that reduces their capacity to relate between education and their society. We should find ways to do this because in Africa, we also have the advantage that we are not that heavily industrialized. So the parenting and the community, especially in our rural areas, even in urban areas, there should be ways of us creating a learning environment within the community and the family and reduce the need to dress our children in uniforms and send them into some kind of classroom with a teacher who has no capacity to relate a classroom situation with the society that the children are brought up in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that presentation. We now open up the floor for questions or contributions. Please use the hand reaction button and we'll unmute your mic. Thank you. There's a question here. If children should not be in a classroom for the first 7 years, it presupposes that the parent will provide an environment that will shape their personality in the right way. But then are parents geared up for such a role, especially having been brought up in the Eurocentric systems? How do we get the parents to provide such an environment or homeschool? That's a question from Simba. Any questions or contributions, please use the hand reaction button.
Shall I respond to Simba's question?
Yes, Prof.
Yes. So this is a typical chicken and egg. Simba is bringing up a very important practical point. What are we Africans going to do to change a situation where we are this is what I call path dependency. We have been put down a path where it's so slippery for us. We are afraid to stop. We're afraid to look aside. We don't know. It's better. You know, you're not going anyplace, but you just continue going the same path because you're afraid to make a change. But it's not all that bad, actually, because if you look at Simba's point and question, so how do we have parents who are already brought up in a Eurocentric sense? How do we create an environment at home that children really are going to imbibe an environment, worldview, and learning? I would actually say that on average, maybe not, I think on average is the right term. Most African parents are not Eurocentric. They may appear to be Eurocentric, but they are not. A very small percentage of African parents would be kind of more Eurocentric than Africans. Most of them, like you and me, Simba, may appear to be Eurocentric because we put on these Western style clothes. But at home, we are still much more African than we are European. And our children are learning more African things from us, even in our deformed way as it is. Can you imagine that besides the fact that radio is probably 50% Eurocentric, television is probably 80% Eurocentric, although it's probably getting less. all the cartoons that the kids see at home are mostly Eurocentric. Besides that fact, I still have experienced that most children are getting more African way of thinking and speaking and relating to siblings and parents and the environment than they are. They would not. You cannot take them to Europe and function that easily. They have to relearn so many things. Okay, but you could take them to another African country and they probably just have to learn the language quickly. They will be able to figure out the rest. So I think we are still very much in a situation where in the first 5 years or so, our children are still learning, are still developing an African identity more than they are losing it. It's when they now go to school after that, after the first 5 years, now they go into that classroom. And I know that with our preschools, but like I say, if only 1% of children are going to preschool, I'm putting that aside. But I think a much bigger number is going to the formal schools from the age of 5, 6. That's where the damage begins. That's where now they are learning how to use a foreign language to learn new things. So they are now beginning to learn more of their foreign language, but they are primarily thinking still in their mother tongue language. That's what I think. And in many ways, they are going to, my thinking is that although there's some reversal in between years 5 to 7, 8, there is some rewiring of that subconscious mind. I don't think it's as huge as I don't know, I haven't seen any research results, but I would still think that they are pretty much wired by the time they are 5 to a largely African way of looking at things. And as I've said, there are ways of rewiring parts of the brain. The older you get, the more difficult. And I've seen some literature which says when you hit about 30, 32, then you're really wired for life. And beyond which, there's only a few other ways of changing. So I would still say to Simba that we don't lose much by really figuring out how do we, in the family to start with, create a situation where we are consciously saying the entire educational process of the children, of your siblings, when we spiritual, is based on the first 7 years that we are with you in here and what they learn from the other people when they go out in the community, if it's in the township, when they go out there in the street. And at the community level, instead of just meeting at the school to talk about the education of our children, we meet at community to talk about what it is about holistic education that I was talking about. We need to impart in our children. It used to happen in the village. It doesn't happen as much in the township. What do we want to teach them about being human, about behaving, about how to work with others, how to play with others? All those values that we believe are what makes us human, Ubuntu. So we now need to get communities in urban areas to get together outside the school environment to discuss how their children grow in the first 7 years and how they should then eventually take that to the school. At the moment, we don't do that. We wait until they go to early child, grade 0 in the case of Zimbabwe or whatever. And then you go to the school environment to talk about your child's schooling, by which time the formal teacher is in charge. It's not the parents anymore. So the relationship between the home environment, the community environment, and the school environment is still the most disjointed as far as I can see. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prof. Any more questions or contributions from the audience? Please use the hand reaction button and we'll unmute you. Jonathan?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Prof, for your presentation. Very enlightening. I think there's a point that you also raised, and it was about underdevelopment. That indeed, as much as we are underdeveloped, that in itself is an advantage. So it is an advantage in that it creates opportunities for content, it creates opportunities for control, it creates opportunities for creativity. Therefore, in our current form and moving forward, we should at least aspire to influence ourselves in that direction. And I think last 2 weeks, we celebrated the Township Girls by our sister Muzenda. I'm trying to recall the first name. My apologies for forgetting the first name. Tambu Muzenda, right? She told us about a book. So obviously that's content. And our brother from Mozambique was also talking about creating content. So I think there's an opportunity to create content to influence the African child. And I think we are not doing enough because the content that the African child is watching at home is largely Western produced. We could do something better, whether it's cartoons, whether it's stories, whether it's anything that we could create for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that. Any questions or contributions from the audience before we hand over to Prof?
Hello.
Over to you, Prof.
Hi. Sorry, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't quite know how to put my hand up on the signals. So I'm interested in what Prof said about JKSI.
JKSI, okay.
Yeah. So I was intrigued by what you said concerning telling new stories from our history. And yeah, I wondered if you could elaborate on that and just cite a few examples. And I sort of, get part of what you're saying, because I mean, only last week, I think I discovered that there was a whole tobacco growing industry, pre-colonial tobacco growing industry in Zimbabwe, with the, in Gokwe, out in the communities of Shangwe and Inyako. And I didn't know this. I mean, after years of studying history and going to school and national, geography today and history and all kinds of things, I've always thought tobacco was an imported kind of industry, and just that confidence even to go into tobacco, knowing that history, even the processing of tobacco and things like that. I mean, I understand what you say in part about telling new stories from history, as we discover ourselves perhaps and grow in confidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. There's a question here from Munya. I'm more interested in the alpha, theta, delta states of mind and how our environment affects these states, e.g. sound, color, shapes, etc. So now my question is centered around if we have ways to interchange these states and at the same time be able to use it to learn or teach the essentials. And then there's another question here from Jonathan. What is our starting point, individual level, country level, and continental level? What are the practical approaches can we take? Over to you, Prof.
Thanks, Kevin. So I think Jonathan made a good point about the opportunities, actually. So, and he mentioned three. Content was the first thing. Now, content, if I take that further, content for early childhood education or for early child care should be almost like 95% based on day-to-day life. But because what the child is learning is how to survive in this world. What are the rules? And how do you cope? And so on and so forth. How do you relate? How do you create? How do you do things? So content should be based on us demonstrating the importance of the slightest, smallest things in our lives, which we have now stopped doing. For instance, every little process that happens in the home, whether it's getting up in the morning and cleaning before you go out, you're cooking food, laundry, you're preparing. There are issues in the family that have to be discussed, and the family has to come on the round table and discuss them, how issues are resolved. If we treat those aspects of life as the real education, and where we monitor our children for progress, more than just their grades that get at school, but at home, they are morons. The same thing when they are in the community, when they go out of that door from the family into the community, it should be the same thing, that the community is collectively agreed what the content is, like we used to do in the village. We have lost that. There's no reason why we can't go back to that, because I think that's what Jonathan referred to as control. Control does not mean you are killing the creativity. Control means self-control, because in almost every African culture, it was more important for people's conscience to be developed as the means of self-control. Okay, they were in traditional society. There were no policemen. There were no criminal investigators. There were no courts of law and prisons. There was nothing like that. You were brought up to have a conscience which helped you to make the right decisions. So if it was the environment, you're not allowed to cut that tree, you're not allowed to kill that animal, you're not allowed to behave like this with the environment. When you go out in the environment, you respect the environment, but there's no policeman. It's your conscience controlling you. I think I can add that to Jonathan's use of the term control. A person's life is sacred. You don't just kill somebody. If you don't grow up knowing that and seeing that on a day-to-day basis, then somebody will just co-opt you into some gang or into some grouping. It can be associations now, it can be ritual this, it can be a political party, it can be anything where you just, it's not somebody's life is not important. Okay, so self-control is the most important aspect of control, not what the government does, not what the chief says, not what the parent says. It should be what the value system that develops in a person should be. So the third thing was creativity, which now is the 5% of the brain which we are underutilizing to now say the day-to-day problems. Let's take unemployment. Why should we let our children believe that on a day-to-day basis they're going to school, but they see people who have gone to school with no jobs? So we're actually teaching them lies. Go get this education, although you're not going to get a job at the end of it. So why am I going to school? So who is creating unemployment? It's our belief system, because we can bring up our children to say there's no such a thing as unemployment. You can work on a day-to-day basis and progress. You don't need to wait to be told by somebody that you are only employed when some company somewhere offers you a job. Because creativity means you can create things given your situation. Creativity is not a set way of behaving. Innovation is not a set way of behaving. It's being able to make the best out of a situation, overcoming whatever situation you're faced with. So I think what Jonathan has given initially as the content, the control or self-control, and the creativity is a good starting point, is an example of a starting point in what I was talking about earlier on in one of my slides, to say what are the analytical research activities to help us to figure out how this educational system must run. And then Jekesai, two things. He had something in the chat box where he was really saying, so even our diet at home, what we eat and how we prepare it, when we say to our children, it's a treat to go and get junk food. That's what we're teaching them. When you eat the chicken I cook for you at home, it's not as valuable as one that I go to buy for you when I get to Chicken Inn. Now Chicken Inn is junk food. Okay, it's not even healthy for you, but you pay 3-4 times more for it than the chicken cooked by your mother at home. So you're actually teaching them lies. You're telling them that junk is more valuable than what you eat at home. But the reason that they buy into that idea is because the Chicken Inn and the Nando's is associated with a Western progress. It's associated with glitz, bling bling. When in actual fact, you're living at home, the most valuable food you can ever have. So I thought that, Jekesai, I was just enhancing what you were saying in the chat box, but then you then came back again, and what was the thing that you mentioned? I'll pick it up. I can't see it now. I'll pick it up later. Then Simba in the chat box also mentioned something very important that connects with Jonathan's point. So everything is a learning environment. He says let's go back to our rural areas more and actually make that a learning environment. Learn anew about not just the society, the value system, but the food, the environment, the ecology, and what's sacred and why that actually reinforces our roots and our belief systems. Then there was who is it that mentioned about the news stories and our history and so on? Sorry, I forgot to write down the name. But for me, news stories cut across everything I talked about today. Because when I say let's write news stories, even that come out of our history, we just have to learn from what the rest of the world has done. Look at what the Americans have done. The Americans have made Hollywood the place where they manufacture the imagination of the rest of the world of how great American values are. I mean, they have sold anything they want to sell. As a kid myself, I bought the idea that the Native Americans were the bad guys. They were the good guys. So the colonizers were the good guys. It was the Native Americans that were bad, but they were able to do it through Hollywood. And I bought the idea and I liked it. Each time I watched a movie, I wanted the white American to win, the cowboy to win, and I wanted the Native American to lose. And I didn't realize this was actually, I was actually just sold a dummy. Because that's what they did exactly to me and my people, and now I'm appreciating them doing it to somebody else. And this whole thing still lives alive today. You still see that we can forgive Americans for the most grievous sins. I mean, they kill Africans on the street every day in the United States, and actually the police were supposed to protect them. We still glorify their society, and we still go and lap and eat everything that's called American because they've been able to sell it. So when we tell our stories, as Africans, we're not going to tell as many lies as I think the rest of the world tells us. But you see, it's killing the colonial mentality that's important in telling our stories from children when they are young, that they actually have a great history behind them. If I talk about myself, the only reason why I even believe some of the things I believe in today is because my parents and my family, they would remind me every single day how great the Moyos were, how actually in every sphere of life we thrived and we did great. And the reason I never converted fully to all these foreign religions and all these foreign ideas is I kept going back to that and thinking, these people did great things. I mean, they built the great Zimbabwe, and no one in the world has been able to build anything like that. It was unique. The society was unique, and so on and so forth. So telling our stories is also important to connect today to the point at which our history was killed by the Europeans. We have to go back to connect Africanness with what it was before colonization. So here is the modern African, contemporary Africa that we want to see. But here is how we drink back and connect the history and know that history did not start 2,000 years ago, because that's what they told us. They said our own lives started when they colonized us. Everything was discovered afresh. They discovered the Victoria Falls. I don't even know why we still call it the Victoria Falls. They discovered this, they discovered that. What the heck? They discovered nothing. It was already there. We were civilized thousands of years before they were here. Now, they then tell us that civilization started 2,000 years ago when Jesus was born. So that's when, so everything starts 2,000 years ago. I mean, what the heck? I mean, we already settled a highly advanced society then. And that's why it is important that I see in most of Africa, we still call it before Christ. They will say 2000, before, it's been changed by the UN to be before Common Era, yeah, which is a little more understandable. So used BCE, before Common Era. We're now in the Common Era, because before Christ means nothing. It's even a fake date anyway, that he was born this way, 25 December. So that is close to New Year, and then you can have a long holiday period and spend, and it's a commercial decision, the birthday of Jesus Christ, so that we can spend more money, and then you spend again at Easter. So anyway, the thing is, we have to tell our own stories from when they are young. The third and even more important reason why we tell our own stories is the importance of myths and mythology in any civilization. Okay, myths are the single most important things that nourish young people's imagination. Now, we still teach early childhood, our children, we still teach them European myths. It's all based on European mythology. I don't even want to name any, because you know them all. So why is this important? This is important because this is when a child is already in a hypnotic state. If a child is 3, 4, they're already in a hypnotic state. So if they play African, it's still hypnosis. They cannot tell the difference between reality and imagination. When you show them a Western mythological cartoon or a movie, like what's that? I can't. Maybe my brain just started to forget most of them. But the point still remains that they've exhausted their myths in commercializing. Now they go to African myths and they say Lion King. They now take African myths and turn them around into Western myths and make billions of dollars from them. And meanwhile, we are still denting the confidence of young Africans as Africans. Now, mythography. So I would say mythology is how we teach ourselves and our educators the importance of myths and how to include that in our educational process. But mythography is probably even more important, because that is how we create new myths that are in vibe with our worldviews. So you'll find that a lot of them are also attached to reality. So in my own clan, the Moyo clan, I'm a Moyo, a Rosie, it's loaded with mythography, creating new myths which fit in our beliefs and our history. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That is important to bring up young people who love their identity and who believe in themselves. So don't underrate, don't be told by anyone that mythography is not important, because that's what has colonized us after the colonials left. They keep pumping myths and their mythology and mythography in our educational system. So I think I've argued for that one long enough. And then Munya came in with wanting to know more about these frequencies, the brain frequencies. I mean, you go on the internet and there's a lot to learn. What I've just told you is the tip of the iceberg, because these frequencies we're talking about, Munya, are the ones that we experience in our normal state. So like I said before, the beta state, which is when you are fully awake, the alpha state when you are super relaxed, and you are not yet asleep, but you are totally relaxed, you're not active, it's lower brain frequency. And then the theta state is the most interesting, because all adults only go into theta just before you go to sleep, between relaxation, between the alpha state and the delta state. When you're weaving in and out of consciousness and almost going to sleep, if you do that, you can even use practical examples of if you're watching television and you're going in and out of alpha and delta, you may actually find that you start dreaming something that is being triggered by a movie that you're not watching anymore, but you're now asleep, isn't it? Because there's no distinction at that point between reality and imagination. But for the youngsters, they are 95% of the time in theta state. Even when they are fully awake, they're not conscious because they are recording things unconsciously and they are learning fast. So then delta, we are asleep. Now the thing is, if you want to learn more about this, then of course you have to learn it from the real experts. I mean, I learned it by following the real experts. I gave you examples of some of those people, but the real world itself has got many other frequencies that are well beyond this, both below delta and above beta, way before, because the wavelengths that transport a voice message over mobile phone, as an example, it's a different wavelength. You can go to ultraviolets, which are a completely different level. They can melt a diamond, which is supposed to be the hardest stone in the world, but throw ultraviolet on it, the diamond will melt. And yet an ion cannot cut through a diamond, but expose it to ultraviolet rays, it will melt. So it's a big area, and I'm a novice in it. I became more interested in for two reasons. As Africans, one, how do we change early childhood education so that it really works for us? We produce people who are real. And for adults, the bigger task of how do we change the hardwired habits and beliefs that we have held. It's something I'm prepared to do a session on in future. It's more difficult, but it can be done. It can be done. And then Jonathan came in with, then what shall we do at individual level, at national level, at continental level? You know, if I start at the other end, Jonathan, at the continental level, I've checked what's happened. The Africa Union has had several, I mean, it's got a full set of activities. It has held conventions. It has even made resolutions around accelerating early childhood education on the continent. It's set targets. It's a huge thing for the Africans, and they are of course being advised by various international so-called entities on this. I don't agree with a lot of what the Africa Union has actually bought into, but it's a tragedy of good intentions. They mean well, but a lot of it is still very much based on Western Eurocentric curriculum and approaches to bringing up children. However, there are some very positive things even within the Africa Union thinking, and there are some positive things from the likes of some of the UN agencies, which are more culturally aware, like UNESCO. UNESCO is on the ball. It's one agency that has worked with top level Africans. A lot of the work I'm quoting on these sessions I'm going through with you are from some of the top most Africans who truly, truly understand this much better than I do. They also understand how best to deploy these ideas continentally. And if I come back to the individual and national, many countries, including my own country, Zimbabwe, have had commission after commission to try and figure these things out. And it all goes back to the path dependency I was talking about. Even retraining teachers is a mammoth task. That's why I was saying I would start by really just banning early childhood education completely in its current form, and actually take it to 7 years, not just children go to school at 5 years. I would say between the ages of 0 to 7 years, no child should be confined in classrooms with a teacher who has no idea how to bring up a truly brilliant young African using African ways of learning. I would not do it. It should be done when people are now at a point where they've been molded as good human beings. They've been brought up in the basic things I call the holistic education. It's more important to bring up young people to be really brilliant at being human, working with others, thinking the right way, being able to work together with others, to play together correctly with others, to resolve issues, to be able to be a fantastic human being. If we can do that in the first 7 years, and then the kind of more creative aspects in the 7 years related to their day-to-day lives, creativity around all the activities of life at home, in the community, in the country. Then after that, we can start grade 1. Then we can throw them into a confined classroom because 95% of their brain has now been wired into local reality, into local identity, and into not wanting to be anything else but what they've been brought to. I think then we can pump them with the more creative content from then on all the way up to PhD. That's what I would say at national level. At individual level is to have high level, we need campaign after campaign to remind parents they are the most important teachers of all. It's not that teacher you send your kid to. If we can convince all our parents, don't let your child first 7 years be determined by what they watch on television, by what their teacher at school teaches them. It's like I said, those values, including the deeper ones of experiencing unconditional love, experiencing trust, experiencing how to be creative, experiencing those deeper human values which attach them to their family, to their community, because they believe this is more important than anything else. And remember, this is how in the past we had the best social security system in the world. It was built that way. There's no NASA or a social security system anywhere in the world which could look after destitute people, orphans, like the African system could do. It's because the system was wired in a way that education made it clear. The educational process was, you can have differences, you can have challenges, you can have problems, you can even have poverty. You can never, ever throw away your own blood. You can never allow children to suffer because the parents were not in good books. I mean, my father and his brothers could fight, and they could be bitter rivals, enemies. But we children were never subjected to that. I would still go to my father's brother and treat them just as 100% my father. But today we mix everything. We are teaching them that if the parents don't agree, the children also must not agree. You see, so we are taking completely different value system at home, and we think that it's nothing, it's not education. We are brought up to believe that you cannot allow adults, you cannot allow your brother to abuse his wife just because he's older than you or younger than you. You have to intervene and say, brother, you can't do that. This is the mother of your children. Resolve issues at home. Today we're told you don't intervene. Who the hell are you? We teach children that you can abuse people and get away with it, and the family can be silent. It was never allowed. The educational system was, you would not allow an adult to be abusive just because they're an adult, okay? And now we say they can have their own divorce, or they can go to their own lawyers or to their counselors. You say, we're going to see the counselors. Well, it's a westernized approach in a society where those values are the furthest away from our reality. So education has to be much deeper than what we call education. We are still having a colonial idea of what education is. We should have an African idea of, well, as long as they're in the house, the home education is more important than the outside education. Okay, I think I've said enough there without diverting too much. Thanks for those wonderful questions and comments. Back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. Because of time, we'll take two more questions. We had Mazita. So Mazita, and then Brian, and then we'll hand it over back to Prof to close off the session. Mazita.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Prof, for the presentation. It was very informative. I have a question. Someone mentioned that how are we sure that when we leave the children up until the age of 7 at home, they will learn what we need them to learn? And you mentioned that most parents are more Afrocentric than they are Eurocentric. How sure are we that they are really Afrocentric and not Eurocentric? Because from my experience and my engagement with various people, it seems to me that most parents are more Eurocentric than they are Afrocentric. Maybe if we speak about our grandparents, they tended to be more Afrocentric than they were Eurocentric. Giving an example, growing up, I remember having things like Nopi, having things like Zio at my grandmother's house. But I do not recall ever having such meals at home to date. And even presently, when we talk about our roots, things like the family tree, to what extent would our parents be able to clearly articulate our family trees and also our roots, where we come from? And after the passing on of, say, our grandparents, Vaninge vari kumusha, for example, when they pass away, do people then continue going kumusha? Is there anyone there who would be able to provide the sort of education or to take the children back to the roots like our grandparents used to do? And it's also, I think, simple things like language. Even most of my friends, they have children and they actively discourage their children from speaking the local languages, be it Shona, be it Chichewa, and things like that. And there's also the issue of working parents. Most of us work. So when we then leave our children, we're leaving them in the care of the helpers. And we are there, a very short period of time. So the raising of the child is then left to the helper. The issues of the collective versus the individual. And most families and households are more individualistic now, and I don't believe that to be African. There's the issue of religion and the myths that you mentioned. I remember even our grandparents telling us Ngano growing up. But right now, when we look at our parents, and even speaking for myself, I don't think I'm able to relay Ngano, the way that our grandparents used to do. So are we sure that we'll be able to take on this task? Are we sure that we're more Afrocentric than we are Eurocentric, for us to then, if we take the children out of school up until 7, are we able to then instill what we are hoping to instill in them? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Marita. Brian, are you still there?
Hi, Kevin.
Yes. How are you, Brian?
Yes. Okay, sure. My question is very related to that one by Marita. So I think. Hello?
Hello. Sorry, Brian, we lost you there. Please repeat that.
Okay. I was saying my question is related to that of Marita.
Oh, okay. All right. So over to you, Prof, and then we'll close the session after you respond.
Yeah. So Mazita, you're absolutely right. So my response is everything is relative. If I interpret what you've said to where I am, I would say what you're saying is, relatively speaking, today's generation of young parents are more Eurocentric than their parents were, and it's getting worse and worse. I think that's what you're saying. And then I'll go through some of the details of what you've said. So I agree with you on that. But, and it's a big but relative to what real Eurocentric education and society is, relative to what real American society and education is, we are very far. So if you pick one of those parents you're talking about who have never been to Europe and you go and throw them in the UK, they will quickly know that what they were practicing in Zimbabwe is no way to being an English way of life. It's not even closely related. But when you're here, you think you're being Eurocentric. You think you're being English. But when you go to England for the first time, now you know that you thought you were just practicing a very out of date and sometimes a very contracted understanding of what a European society really is and how it functions. So Masita, I want you to focus on what I'm calling the relative aspect of what you're saying. If you live in Borodale, in suburb in Harare, or in Bryanston in Johannesburg, or some quote unquote kind of upmarket suburb in Nairobi, you think you are living a Eurocentric life. Well, if you have never been to Europe or to the United States, or fly out there after living 10 years in Borodale, and then you go and experience what life is in living in a white suburb in London, then you will know the behavior of the neighbors, how they relate to the neighbors, how they work in the community, how their children get educated, how they relate to their, is completely different to what you and I are practicing in our so-called Eurocentric lifestyles. It's very, very far. That's what I mean when I say, even in what you call, Masita, a Eurocentric lifestyle of parents, is still very far from being European or American. It's still loaded. It's still loaded, even if though it's deteriorating, it's still loaded with very much African way of thinking and life. So let me first explain what I think the solution should be before I go into some of the examples you were giving. So I think the solution there is just modernizing some of the elements that we are losing fast. You gave some excellent excellent examples. Let's take Ngano, for instance, storytelling, the kinds of stories that were told and how they were told. It's not necessary per se today if you have lost, if we have brought up our families so that there's a disconnection with the grandparents. Okay, because historically those stories would be told because the grandparents would live in the same home as the grandchildren. Now, the chances are that the grandparents are somewhere else and the parents are living in a more secluded life with their own children. So now that we cut out that, what are the modern ways of still getting our children to listen to African stories told in the local language? Well, film them and show them and make it exciting for them to learn about those same stories using different media. I mean, this is what everyone does in the world. It's not a static thing. It's the values that are the same, but the means, the technology, the rituals differ. So the Europeans today are still showing us, you know, I don't know how many times they've recycled their Jack and the Beanstalk. What's the name of that? There's a lot of mythology around the princesses and the ones that and the green frogs and the prince. What can you give me an example, somebody? I know somebody said, yeah, blah 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 black sheep. I don't know what that one, but there's Jack and Jill, but there's this famous kind of myth, Cinderella. I've forgotten about it. I am happy that I'd forgotten about it because really, I mean, how many times have they recycled Cinderella stories? It's more than 100 years, isn't it? Movies, what have you, cartoons. So why can't we do that? Why do we, instead of complaining that the grandparents are no longer there, why can't we just tell our stories using new media?
It's okay, doesn't it?
I think there's some interference.
Sorry about that, Prof.
So Mazita was talking about the real practical things that we need to take into consideration, the real issues. And I'm saying these are challenges which continue to dog us, not because they're insurmountable, but because there's an absence of higher thinking on our part. Our challenges, Mazita, are our refusal to think higher than we are thinking now. Our problems are in absence of higher thinking, not in the presence of insurmountable evil. They already went, those Europeans. So these issues of Kumusha, you know, not knowing the family tree, I mean, even the Americans did roots. I mean, African Americans did roots. The most Europeans trace they don't believe in the bigger family, but they can still trace their roots. They've got a better system of having kept their records. We used an oral one. So why can't we also be creative in the way we continue to tell our stories, in the way we continue to push our belief systems and use new technology? Let's use existing technology. Let's use the internet. Let's use everything. Let's modernize, not westernize. Because we're saying if we can't modernize an African thing by keeping it African, therefore we adopt a Western thing. No, we should modernize, not westernize. So I'll say that that would be my response to Mazita. I would say, maybe let me just give you an example, Mazita. I have known people here in Zimbabwe before I ever traveled out of Zimbabwe. I would meet not just Black Africans. I would meet what we call colored. So there would be mixed black and white and whites who were born and bred here in Zimbabwe and never went anywhere else. And they fly to England for the first time after they're adults and they have a culture shock. They thought they were Europeans, they thought they were English. They get to England, they find they are the furthest away from England. They have to learn a lot of new behaviors. I know a colored girl who was born of a white father and a black mother, and she had grown up looking down on her mother and idolizing her father. When she got to England for the first time, within 6 months, she had a nervous breakdown because she grew up thinking, wow, it was more important to be white than black, and even better to be colored than black. And she goes to England, and there's no distinction between a colored and a black person. You're all black, and the culture is the same. So it's all relative. And she had a nervous breakdown. So what Majita we think is European when we are here in Africa is far from it when you go there. That's what I mean. We still have more, even in white Zimbabweans as an example, white South Africans as an example. They go to Australia and half of them come back traumatized. And some of them can't even get a job. They find they are third, fourth class whites there. They don't even believe they are real whites because the Australian is a first class white and the European is a second class white. If you're South African, maybe you're a third class white. If you're white Zimbabwean, you're fourth class white. So it's traumatic even for them, Mazita. They'd rather come back here. They were brought up by a white nanny. They were looked after by a black nanny here, and they know more about being an African than about being an Australian or a Canadian. So that's all I'm saying is I'm saying that relatively speaking, we are still more African even in our way of thinking we're European than anything else. What we need to do is just modernize it, go back and use whatever we have to continue to reinforce what we are losing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that for a wonderful presentation. Our session has come to an end. Majita has got her hand up. Majita, before we close off the session.
Oh, sorry, Kevin, it wasn't a hand up. I was just clapping my hands.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please do like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni. Follow us on Facebook, Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni, and on Twitter, using the same handle, Dialogue with Prof Mandi. Thank you very much for joining us, and good night. We'll catch each other next week where we continue this topic and we dig deeper. Thank you. Good night.